for joining me for the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. So I'm so happy to have this second conversation with Tyson Yunkaporta. He's a brilliant thinker. He's the author of Sand Talk, How Indigenous Wisdom Can Save the World, which I think everybody should read because I think saving the world is probably not a bad idea. And in this conversation, we cover a lot of the core beliefs that have guided my life from his indigenous perspective. And trigger warning, he's not a fan of veganism. And double trigger warning, I don't try to defend it. Instead, we yarn about it and trying to put it into a perspective in which my veganism, which I see as a way to minimize harm through my lifestyle choices, can coexist with his indigenous sense of living according to the law of the land. So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. And I've got to say, people come and they want to be on the podcast who are, healers and chefs. And I take a look at their website, and if they have a recipe with eggs in it, I say, no, this is not a good fit. But I really wanted to have this conversation because I do believe that veganism is a tactic. It's not the end goal of life. And so in this conversation, I wanted to see, can we get to an agreement about how humans should live, whether veganism is a part of it or not. So we also talk about the hero's journey, of which Tyson is not a fan. And I've kind of lived my life and taught a lot based on the hero's journey. So it was really interesting to hear how this is an artifact of a particular civilization, a self-terminating civilization, as opposed to a truism. The natural law, the monomyth of Joseph Campbell. Apparently, he grabbed a lot from indigenous cultures and missed most of the context. It's a long and comprehensive conversation, so rather than give you all the summary now, I'll just let you get right into it. So without further ado, Tyson Yunkaporta, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Hey, how you doing? Let's get planted.
Yeah, so I want to do a little bit of background, not assuming that everyone's listened to the last one that we did with Glenn Murphy or read your book. But basically, you've written this book, Sand Talk, that kind of showed me that a lot of my assumptions about the world are really assumptions about a very limited experience of civilization, of a culture, and it's not universal. And since we talked last time, and I keep coming up with more and more examples that I think this is one, and I think this is one too. But you have sort of like a general, like a grounding of the difference between, your book is subtitled "How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World," like a basic fundamental difference between indigenous thinking and what I have grown up on.
Yeah. Well, I guess just time. It's funny, I think if you're really genuinely using indigenous thinking that you're embedded in, the word indigenous and the category of indigenous and non-indigenous doesn't work anymore. Do you know what I mean?
That's one of the things that I've actually been going in circles about is how to ask, the problem isn't that I'm going to get the wrong answer, but it's that I'm asking the wrong questions. Or the question that I ask is already loaded with an assumption.
That's it. And I guess I'm just making a distinction there between, there's this idea of the authentic indigenous, like the native, untouched, untainted, never had the flu. It's that idea, as if that exists anywhere on the planet anymore. Maybe a couple of places, but if so, not for long. And then there's, the native, the colonized and in the process of decolonizing kind of native, you know what I mean? So for a lot of people, being indigenous is about being of indigenous descent and, inhabiting that group identity and sort of, moving towards these ideas of decolonization. If not actually physically, into a separate nation. which is usually what happens. We just end up replicating these settler structures of nations when we separate. If not like that, then just, your self-work inside your you're getting the colony out of your system or whatever. It's a difficult thing. But like, I don't know, to actually really deeply inhabit, what people are calling indigeneity and all the rest of it, you find that all these terms lose meaning for you. Like they just fall by the wayside because, I mean, they're looking at very different time frames, different timelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For me, the indigenous knowledge it's not in the history and the stories and the tragedies and all that sort of thing. Like that's something that we have to deal with. That's true. However, like it's in the processes and ways of thinking, ways of knowing that have survived everything, that we're all carrying. That's what I find really exciting, because those things are resilient and they survive all kinds of cataclysms. And I guess the world's facing some cataclysms at the moment. So it's those robust and resilient, like meta structures of culture, which are going to be important to carry forward. So we need to pay attention to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think about there's something like very romantic about, okay, I would love to go live in a Stone Age village, right? And just, right. But that's not realistic. That's not going to save us. We're not, humanity is not going to make that choice, nor do I think that that's a very indigenous way of thinking. Like, hey, let's just, reverse the clock and go back to that. But I'm also thinking, like, I've read some books by, I guess, a Mayan shaman, Martin Prechtel, who talked about, like, the Mayans could have invented computers, but it cost too much. Like, they understood that.
Isn't that lovely?
How like I'm trying to figure out how can I
do see all that chip circuitry in their artwork, Yeah. Sorry, keep going now.
Yeah, like how do I approach the sustainable ways that indigenous ways of knowing have, while I'm surrounded by electric lights, by particle board, by computers. Is there a way to, I'm thinking about this in terms of like the pure past and the messy, like, extractive future. Like, is there a non-extractive way to go?
Here's the thing, this is what being indigenous is, for want of a better word, the thing that everybody's looking for. Basically, I call it human, because we're all born in that way. We're all born indigenous. We have to be industrialized and domesticated over about 8 years. So anyway, so that way, that undomesticated, that might be a better word. That way, if we're being the species that we're supposed to be and occupying our ecological niche, which is the custodial species niche, if we're doing that, then what we're doing is we're adapting to our context, and we're responding to our context, whatever the hell it is. You find yourself in a gulag, that's your context, and you're responding to it. You find yourself in bloody Silicon Valley, then you're there and you're working with that. And just that's what we do. So wherever we are now, that's what we have to respond to. It doesn't mean we have to support any destructive systems that are continuing to destroy, but we do need to respond in real time to the real things that are going on. Look, there's this idea about, there's this false division of sort of natural and synthetic. And, my old people keep slapping me for doing that, because they keep going, no, polymer resins have dreaming too, kind of thing. Computer chips have a dreaming too. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, they do, but anyway, so everything that's in creation, good or bad, is part of creation. Yes, that's true. But, under the patterns of custodial relations that we have, I've come to understand that there are combinations of things. And I guess we can get into this with diet soon, because that's what we really need to be talking about today, is diet. Like, I felt like that's where you wanted to go.
I wanted to explore that as a I mean, as sort of a case study of this larger issue. Like, I don't just want to debate
Okay,
vegan,
cool.
but like
Yeah.
because that
Well,
means so
diet's
much to
going to be a
me.
really good example of this. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So in what people are calling nature, there are things that should be combined, and there are things that should remain separate. And that's what the law of the land is for. And the law of the land, at a basic level, a lot of people will refer to that as natural law, or even the laws of physics. Like, they're there to tell us our limits, and if you're combining things that shouldn't be combined, then over time, the law of the land will sort you out, and you will be ceased from existing. Okay, so for example, an animal species, any species that is starting to do, repeatedly over time, father-daughter or mother-son matings. So if they're mating parent and child, that species in a very short time will cease to exist, because the law of the land will take care of them. That's a combinatorial that shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's too. I mean, yes, it can happen, and the children that are born of that union, yes, they are part of creation, and they are special, lovely beings. That's true, but that shouldn't be happening. So the law of the land will take care of that, like with birth defects, etc. Over time, will destroy that line. Will destroy that, even that species, if that species continues to do that. So, there are things that shouldn't combine. There are elements that shouldn't combine. Like there's certain things uranium just in the ground, it's all right in that form when it's in the ground. But when you start to combine it with other things and do weird stuff to it, it goes no good. Everything else, there's certain things that you should not be messing with and combining with other elements.
Right.
There are certain so all the things that have been combined together to make new elements to make your computer, that's all, the natural law of that. The law of the land has already meted out its punishment for that. Like, a bunch of poisons have been produced from that are going to kill you. They're in the air, they're in the water, and they're in the land now, and they will kill you. Your punishment has already been set in motion from this computer that you're using, because it's against the law of the land. Anyway, so that was the way I've been trying to describe it lately, is this idea of wrong combinations of things. Yes, they're part of creation, and yes, they exist, and yes, they have spirit, but there's certain things that shouldn't be combined, and I guess we're here as the custodial species to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. So when I filter that through what I think is sort of the central dictum of the book about narcissism.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, and again, I can hear the industrial progress oriented echoes in the question. Is like, how do I know what's good to combine? Like, human beings are inventors. We try new stuff all the time. Is there I'll give you an example. There's CRISPR technology, these genetically modifying genes, and we've seen a lot of stuff that people argue about. But I just heard recently about CRISPR technology applied to precision fermentation. To have these vats where you can grow proteins and whatever you want. So and a lot of vegans are like, yay, we can finally grow meat, and we don't have to hurt animals anymore, and we won't have any more poverty, because we can also grow all the vegetables, and it'll be much cheaper and perfect, and we won't have to be in land. And I'm listening to this, and part of my mind is going, wow, that's amazing. The part of my mind that read Sand Talk is that is some dangerous shit.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky because you don't know. So just look at CRISPR, right? Let's just look at that. So you could look at Africa and say, man, there's so much sickle cell anemia there. We got to sort that out. We can sort it out with gene editing. We could gene edit everyone in Africa so there's no more sickle cell. And so you do that, and then all of a sudden, all these people start dropping dead with malaria, because, most people carry the sickle cell as a recessive gene, and that recessive gene makes you resistant to malaria. You know what I mean? So I mean, what if you just cured sickle cell, and then all of a sudden millions more people are dying from malaria? And then you go, oh well, shit. What are we gonna? Okay, we need to kill every mosquito in Africa. Here, let's just genetically modify 3 female mosquitoes who, like, will spread infertility throughout the mosquito population, and then let's let them rep. Because they are releasing genetically modified freaking mosquitoes all around the world at the moment to do all kinds of weird stuff. Anyway, so you let them go and from your CRISPR, and then every mosquito in Africa drops dead. No more malaria. It's awesome. And then why are the elephants dying? Why are the giraffes like, what did their necks look like that before? That's weird. Everything has a knock-on effect in complexity. And, if you do not have appropriate lenses to be able to view the complex whole over time, and you need to be able to view it over deep time and the knock-on effects, then you shouldn't be tinkering with anything. It might be nice to have a glow in the dark, like a chihuahua that you can read by at night. I mean, people are doing that just in their backyards now. It might be nice, but I don't know, just think about that for a bit. Anyway.
So, I mean, it's weird. What just came to my mind is there's, the number one series on Netflix right now, at least in the U.S., is this series called The Queen's Gambit about.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen it?
I'm in the middle of it right now. I'm loving it.
Okay, so like to me, that's like a metaphor for colonializing civilization. Like everything everybody tries as a solution actually is the problem, right? Like the couple want to adopt, and the adoption becomes a problem. The mother takes her for a ride, that causes the problem. The pills are supposed to help her, and they become everything that everybody tries becomes a bigger problem that they have to resolve. And it feels like that's Western civilization. That's the civilization that it's not like Nietzschean, like you have your thesis and antithesis, and then you have a better synthesis. When you look at it over indigenous time, it's just getting worse and worse.
Yeah. Look, this basically the Queen's Gambit is a story of someone who's stubborn enough they refuse to allow their mind to be domesticated. That's it. It's a girl through a series of accidents who discovered, a stubborn streak in herself that allowed her to, even though it threatened her life to do so, she refused to let her mind be domesticated. And that's it. That's all it is. And of course it's going to destroy her. I'm not to the end yet, so don't spoil it for me. Actually, you can spoil it. I don't care. But yeah, she's probably going to die. I mean, it's very difficult to live in this society, with an undomesticated mind or a not completely domesticated mind in any way, unless that interaction with society is mediated by some sort of drugs. Yeah. But back to food. I mean, I'm imagining all these sort of vegan tubes, like, you've got a machine there each day that'll Star Trek up your dinner for you, and you can have whatever you want, or like, and it's kind of interesting because to be vegan and not die over a decade or two, you've got to have a bit of a lab going. Like you've got to be a bit of a scientist. Like you need to mix like just the exact amount of stuff, like 20% this one and, supplements in order to make sure that you're actually able to absorb those proteins and absorb all those nutrients the right way. And you've got to just try and get the right kinds of medium chain fatty acids to approximate what a long chain fatty acid might do for your brain and your central nervous system and everything else. Like there's so many things you have to do and get the quantities just right in order to still be healthy, that it's a lot. It's very hard.
Yeah. That is not my experience at all. So in fact, I find like the solution that I'm going for is that what I tell people how to eat is to eat what you like. If you were living on this land,
Mm.
Eat what you could get in naturally attainable quantities.
Right.
So, like, if you're going to have a cookie, like, let's
Yeah.
figure out how much wheat would you like, how much energy would you have to put into collecting all the ingredients, the wheat, the sugar, the fat,
Nice.
and so like there's a way in which a largely plant-based diet would have been what we would have eaten. Right.
Well, I guess in the country where you are, the idea is for humans anyway. The idea is follow the bears. Like humans eat what the bears eat.
Right, but then once we've already domesticated crops.
Yeah.
Right. So now to be like when I look at the world as it is right now, to me being vegan is the best option for me, for the environment. When you look at where else could I get my meat from factory farms, from feedlots, all the food, all the grains and the soybeans that are grown for the animals as opposed to for me. And so what I can do is I can get. Yeah, go ahead.
So sorry, man. I just really quick. You're being, indigenous to your environment. You're responding and adapting to your environment and to the food chains that are around you. It's Sorry, that was a thought I just had. It's like, you're in that, so you're doing it, and it's working. Sorry, keep on, bud.
Yeah, well, it's working. My concern is that I can take something that's working and turn it into a religion.
Yeah.
Right. Which means like the thing that I did when I was 4 years old that worked is I would skin my knee and cry and get chocolate. And I could spend my whole life doing some version of that.
Yeah.
And like, I'm feeling like veganism is a really positive response to this environment in which I'm in, but it's not going to save, like what I learned was veganism will save the world. It will save civilization, but it still requires huge monocrops. It's still like I feel like the ultimate answer is something like not having, finding a way to get back to nature.
Well, it's about, okay. So yes, we're the custodial species. So the idea, like a lot of vegans, like they're really cool about policing everybody else's food choices. Okay, so it's like, well, that's how I'm a custodian of the world. I'm trying to stop the murder of all these animals who look a little bit like me. Who, like, when they have a baby, I would look at that baby and go, oh, you know what I mean? But I guess here's the thing: what you're supposed to be a custodian of is your food chain, your bioregion, but your diet. So what you're bringing into that bioregion, for your diet, or what you're extracting from that bioregion. The idea is regeneratively giving back and making sure that lasts. Now, so I guess like your challenge as a vegan is to figure out, how do we do soybean production without biocide? And maybe CRISPR is one of those directions. And
well, say more about biocide. Like, what are we killing when we grow soybeans?
You're killing. Okay, for a start, you're killing so many animals that look like you, and with babies that you would think were cute. Like, you're killing a lot of mammals.
Maybe like rabbits and mice that are in the fields that get harvested.
Okay, yeah. Well, they're the things that are in the fields now, and yes, they get just churned up with the rest. But what about what was in the field before? Before it became a soybean field? That, I mean, the actual just the eradication of that biota in order to make the dead dirt patch that you're then gonna spray all your chemical fertilizers and stuff on to make your soybean production, into this sponge of dead dirt. I mean, not to mention just the bioside of the earth itself, like the soil, like a teaspoon of soil, as you know, contains so much life, like more diversity of life in one healthy teaspoon of soil than you'll find in probably the whole rest of your community. You know what I mean? It's just incredible what's in dirt. So to kill that dirt is the most horrendous thing. It's an act of self-termination, for your own species, let alone all the things you're killing in there. But the land that had to be cleared and the ecosystem that had to be disrupted in order to even just make that soy field, it's so much more than the, billions of animals and insects and everything else, and not marsupials where you are mammals, everything else that just gets destroyed with the harvest and the planting and the clearing of the weeds, etc., like every season. It's so much more than that, what has been destroyed. And it's so much more than that, just that massive soy field that's blocking flows from one natural system to the next. All those little mice and rodents and stuff that are going through it, they're trying, and the reptiles and everything else, they're trying to get from one island of sort of what's left, a remnant bit of natural land. They're trying to get from that island to the next one on the other side of your soy field, because things move in ecosystems, and these things need to be connected at least with corridors if you're going to have these ridiculous bloody, big monocrops like that. But also what you're doing to the soy itself in domesticating that plant and only selecting the biggest, brightest, most protein bearing seeds, you're dooming that plant species to death, because you're not supposed to do that. You have to select the withered seeds as well, some of them to go in, because like a tiny little seed that's actually no good for food to eat, out of your soybean, that has to go into the genetic profile as well, because that'll be carrying something else that might be resistant to a locust plague down the track. You know what I mean? If you keep inbreeding all of these, biggest and brightest soy seeds, and God forbid GMO ones as well, you're basically creating this inbred, incestuous, horrendous bloody species, which is going to wither and die. Like I said, any species that's doing parent-child mating pairings is going to die out. Any species that is just mating like with like with like with like. In nature, it doesn't happen like that. Diversity is really important.
Right. Yeah.
So it's sorry, that's only just skimming the surface. And I know I've monologued for ages, and I'm ruining the yarn because I'm talking for way too long. But it's that's just a brush on the surface of how destructive it is. So feedlots with cattle and pigs, they're incredibly destructive. But most of that destruction is because of the surplus grains from these mega crops that are subsidized by governance to produce more than we could ever eat. So we're forcing these animals to eat it, and they don't like it. The systems don't like it. They're not supposed to be eating that. They're supposed to be eating grass. And so they're just farting and farting and farting as they sort of grow fat with their sick guts. Like, you have to make an animal sick to make it what the marketplace wants, and then you got to kill it. It's awful, these things. But, pastoralism is probably the most sustainable bloody farming practice that we can have, and food production practice that we can have. Pastoralism, where you actually have shepherds kind of thing, and you're moving flocks around on good grassland, which is the best kind of carbon sink you can have, by the way. And those animals grazing on that, but being moved around so they're not staying in one place and wrecking it, they're reproducing that pasture over and over again and fertilizing it really well. And so you're moving these things around. Most of the arable land on the planet is not suitable for growing food plants on. It's not suitable for horticulture. It's suitable for pastoralism. So we need to have these grass-fed beasts being tended and moved around in the same way that wolves and hunters and all kinds of things used to move the bison herds around on your island there on Turtle Island. Used to move the buffaloes around, and that would shape the landscape and keep it reproducing.
Right.
Prairies, I think it's 97% of your prairies are gone and dead. These need to come back. They're going to collect more carbon than the Amazon will ever collect. Just your prairies, just if you brought back 20% of them. These are important. And that's what should be where the soy and the corn and everything else is being grown, most of which is being destroyed to make artificial bloody scarcity so that it's worth something in the market, but constantly being subsidized. So we're producing more and more and more. And it's like, God, what else can we get out of this corn? Stuff it, corn syrup. Nobody wants corn syrup. It makes them feel sick. Stuff it. Just put it in the tin of beans. Put some corn syrup in their beans. Put it in everything. Put it in the paint. But I mean, soy is so toxic. Like the toxic waste that comes out of having to refine soy to make it edible, to turn it into tofu. The stuff that comes out of it, it used to go into paint. They used to put it into paint.
Yeah.
And now they put it into food. They put it into our like protein bars. It's just like, it's awful. And for a man, it's worse because it messes with your estrogen, and it's terrible. Especially, so if you're someone like me, eating a lot of soy and having 2 young babies, because when you've got young babies and you're a man and you're not just a prick who just goes away and forgets about them, if you're actually looking after those babies, your estrogen levels like go right up and you put on heaps of weight and you start crying a lot. But, soy does that to you as well. And it really messes with you as a man. So you got to be careful with that soy.
Well, I'm there's plenty of science in my head, about, sort of studies of the difference between like estrogen from cow's milk and soy. So, I'll have a lot of listeners saying, why didn't you tell them about the studies that show that soy is a beneficial estrogen? But I'm not here to argue, but I want to kind of frame it.
Actually, let's leave that sort of stuff out. Because then it's not a yarn. Like I do want to talk to you as we go along about, indigenous diets and how they work, on our continent. And I've spoken to Native Americans who talk about, yes, you follow the bears, because what the bears eat is what humans are supposed to eat. And, so the bears will show you that what the edible fungi are, and like this massive diet of just, this omnivorous diet that in the right season, you're having some of these salmon, and you're having some of these things, and you're having honey, and you're having fungus, and you're having greens and roots and shoots and berries and all kinds of things.
Right. So, and again, so living in this society in which all these persistent organic pollutants concentrate up the food chain and get stored in fat, right? Like there's like health reasons to avoid almost all animals, even like wild ones. I just want to offer a couple things for like what I had a couple conversations with a veganic farmer up in Maine who is into regenerative, and he was pointing out that if you eat tofu, you are basically supporting the pork industry, because the reason tofu is cheap is that all the stuff that's not all the okara gets sold to pig farms in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So like the more you start, like, there's a myth of veganism that I have held for a long time, that it's somehow pure, and it's sort of encapsulated, and it doesn't spill out.
Yeah. Have you come across the idea of the local food movement? The idea that you have a 50-kilometer radius for your food.
Yeah.
And some people, do a challenge where they do it for a year like that. And then they have to get very creative, and there's things they have to grow and produce themselves, and all different kinds of relationships they have to make with different farmers and people, and networks of people growing things in their backyards in order to get everything they need. I mean, I think a challenge would be to combine local food with veganism in that way, and I think because the only reason that veganism would be a sort of a destructive force in the world is if it was relying on these big food chains. But then everybody's diet is a destructive force in the world when relying on these massive food chains. And there's something bad about that food that comes to you like that. There's something that's no good about it. Like I eat a lot of meat, but I find the meat that I get, there's so much meat that most of the meat now, for some reason, it doesn't eat grass anymore. And when you eat it, it's just nothing there. Like you're eating this fat where you're expecting to get all your good things from it, from an indigenous point of view. And there's nothing in that fat except just, carcinogens. It's just awful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I'm a little like when you talk about pastoralism. So certainly, the bison in North America created the 14 feet of topsoil for prairie. The herds in Africa, created a very lush land. But is there a difference between that and hunting those creatures and domesticating them? Like domestication of humans, domestication of soy. Like, is there a problem with eating cows and sheep and these animals that have had their will to live almost bred out of them?
Yeah. Well, I think there's the other Native American thing I've heard is the idea that that wolves teach people how to be human. And the wolves have quite a distinct role with those herds, that they don't sort of own or domesticate them, but they're in relation with them, and they have kind of a covenant with those herds. And I guess, for humans as a custodial species, you have to have a bit of a covenant with the food, and with the species that you're living with and from, There has to be a covenant there, whereby you're making sure that you perpetuate that species, that your relationship with them is custodial. Now, custodial, it's different from stewardship. It's different from having dominion over. The idea of capturing an animal and locking it up is just horrendous to me. Like, I hate that. I refuse even to have pets. I hate the idea of pets. It's just awful to do that to an animal. Who would do that? It's just horrible. You just, yeah. I mean, it's bad enough that we're domesticated, but then that we might go on and domesticate other beings is just awful. And I guess if you look at in the Middle East, where as their civilization declined, as all of their land turned into desert, that was forest and pasture land before. When you read in the Bible, it was quite beautiful. the lands there just a few thousand years ago. But now you look at it and it's all desert. So I guess, as their land just got devastated by these earliest civilizations, you can see that a lot of those peoples, most of them returned to a kind of pastoralism. So they had flocks and herds that they weren't locked up, but they were just there was this kind of relationship, with those animals. And there was this covenant of, I will keep an eye on you throughout the day and the night, and I'll protect you from other predators. And, we're gonna eat some of you over time, throughout your lives, and your life cycle is going to end up, the idea, your life cycle, instead of just sort of dying and sort of being distributed around throughout the ecosystem, that's going to be mediated by, you're going to pass through my digestive system at some stage as well. So there's that kind of covenant that happens there. So you're part of that food chain rather than being a sort of a master of it, funneling it all into you. And instead of distributing all the resources from that, you're just kind of, putting it into these static heaps of waste that are sort of confined in one spot, or that, are intensified and toxified and all that sort of thing. So I think that pastoralism was good. And I can see, in the Middle East, that they kind of returned to that. And then they had a kind of sustainable, agriculture around these oases and around places along rivers and all that sort of thing, where they allowed those natural cycles of the rivers and everything else to keep sustaining, the environment. And they kind of returned to that with a lot of the crops they were growing, and they had trade, with other places. And so they were able to live quite well, as they kind of allowed their civilization to wind down. And they were kind of in a phase of transition back to becoming fully human again in the Middle East. back to a kind of indigeneity, until Anglo Oil arrived, and that company Anglo Oil arrived, and then they sort of changed everything back again. So you ended up with these, weird transitioning sort of feudal, monarchies ended up sort of, getting this artificial injection of wealth, and so that got weird there. You find that all around the world. People, so you're in the jungle, you're in the Amazon, and you're finding ruins of civilizations that were trialed as an experiment and then just fell. You go to Zimbabwe and you see some of the oldest ruins in the world that nobody's quite sure how it got there. And archaeologists go, well, we're just not going to look at that. We're just going to assume that white people were in Africa at some stage. But, all these places, civilization has been an experiment over the last 10 to 15,000 years. And these things have risen and fallen, and people have returned back to sustainable, ways of living with their environment, with a vast range of different diets.
Yeah. So it seems like being in a covenantal relationship with a species, whether it's animal or plant, takes a lot of consciousness and a lot of thought. So when in my romanticized view of native peoples, they're like, talking to the spirit of the deer and having ceremonies to thank, and the corn and the squash and the beans are sisters. And it's very animistic. And it's one of the things that I loved about Sand Talk is like, you're trying to get through my head that rocks are I can be in relation with rocks, and I need to be in relation with rocks. And there's a form of like equality that maybe is the flip side of the narcissism. As long as that people are equal and have equal access to resources and equal opportunities and equal status, that I don't have a bunch of people working for me. It seems like that's sort of the basis for an indigenous way of being covenantal with your ecosystem.
Yeah, that's it. And these things, they're not just ceremonies and rituals to try and make sense of the world. They're actually supposed to bring your way of life into alignment with the natural system, and to guide your sort of holistic understanding of any interventions you do in that system, so they don't have bad knock-on effects. So we have, like in Australia, we've been trading with Asia since long before European invasion here. There was trade with Asia. So we have but before anything's introduced, animals, plants, anything like this takes a very long time of sitting down and understanding the foundational story, the pattern, almost the DNA of that species. Like, you really need to understand the pattern of that, and to have the right metaphors to describe that, and figure out how that will come into the system without disrupting it too much. So for example, do you eat much tamarind? Have you come across tamarind?
I get the paste in like the Indian grocery store.
Yeah. So that Indian food there. Well, we've got, as a native plant now, we have right across the north in Australia, we have tamarind, but that was only introduced maybe 1,000 years ago, into our ecosystem, and it took time. And there are song cycles for that. So there is ceremony for that plant, because that's been brought in. And that's kind of like the, it's like what you have big sort of management texts, land management texts, and biology sort of chapters around these sort of things. It's like that. And it's about understanding how to manage that, and where they're supposed to be, and how they're supposed to interact with and fit into everything else. So there is ceremony for that plant. There's ceremony and song cycles for tobacco, for not just the native tobaccos that have always been here, but the ones that have been introduced from Asia through that trade. Song cycles for different forms of agriculture that came down from New Guinea, which is like the oldest agriculture on the planet there in New Guinea. They know how to do it right in that environment. But some of that came down into the north of Australia. Lots of different, plants and technologies and all these things, these get introduced, and they come in with a dreaming, and they come in with a correct usage way, and people become responsible for those as totems. So one of my family totems is the dog, and the dog, of course, was introduced, but there is a story place with a dreaming, for dogs in my community. There's song and there's dance, and there's very sacred sculptures that we do for dogs in my community. And that's one of my family's totemic sort of responsibility is, and we end up with these dogs that are they're like sacred cows almost, the way those cows wander around in sort of vegetarian communities in India. And, you're not allowed to mess with them. We've got in my community, dogs are like that. They're a really sacred sort of animal. So, this is how these things happen. And I guess, as a vegan, like one of your roles is to figure out, well, what's my relation with soy, and what's my responsibility to soy? This soy is keeping me alive. I have a covenant with that soy. How do I become responsible for the continuation of that species and to maintain the diversity of it? And I think if you're eating a lot of soy, you should probably be growing a few soy plants in your garden, not for production, but just a few soy plants mixed in with everything else, just so you can talk to that plant and sort of be with that plant and understand it and allow it to, cross-pollinate with other sort of, diverse soy plants, and allow it to just, evolve there in your garden and to evolve alongside it. And you come into relation with that plant and you make a connection with it. Yeah.
Oh, I feel good because we grew like 50 or 60 soy plants, and they gave us maybe 4 cups of edamame, but,
which is delicious when salted. Yeah. Yeah, but it's almost not about that production with the food. It's about it's obviously you're not doing it for the 4 cups of edamame.
Right.
You're doing it to come into relation with that plant and understand it.
Yeah. It's funny. We grow all these different kinds of beans, and they're beautiful. Different, like a bean, a variety, like they're red ones with scarlet things and orange ones. And we would bring in this basket, and we would, the whole kitchen is now a complete mess. Like it's impossible to do anything in the kitchen. We then have to move everything into the dining room when we're shelling them. And my son comes in, he's, 21, and he's like, you could have, he sees us, my wife and I will spend 4 hours on a Saturday shelling beans. And we end up with, he's like, that's like $1 worth of beans at the supermarket. What the hell are you doing? And to me, the answer is so obvious, but I don't know exactly. I think you've helped me put it in words. Why am I doing that?
You're doing a lot of work it's more than what the energy you're getting from that plant. But that's the thing. You're trying to give back. You're trying to be in a reciprocal relation with those plants. And you just, as an organism, that's part of your patterning, and that's what you have to do. And that's really exciting to me. It's beautiful.
Well, I'm so happy about that. And I love how you're framing it, because I'm coming in. I came in for a long time thinking that veganism was the solution. And while I don't think it's the problem, I don't think it's the solution, because it's built on assumptions of this civilization, which is self-terminating. What I wanted to ask you about, this might be a totally off-topic thing, but I was inspired by your self-reflection about your yarns, the ones that went well. It's just don't second guess or self-doubt. I wanted to ask you about the idea of orphan, and as I hear myself say it, I know there's things you allude to about your life in the book, which I'm sensitive about. But that just occurred to me right now, honestly. I was thinking the central literary metaphor of my civilization is the orphan story.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me for the first time
come
after
back
reading,
to we come back to the Queen's Gambit.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah. But that like that's the central hero that we all identify with in the West is the orphan, from Harry Potter to Beth Harmon in the Queen's Gambit to just about everyone. And I was wondering, like, is that in traditional indigenous tales as well? Or is that like this idea of being orphaned? Is that just like our trauma?
No, I mean, so in our culture, and this is only something that I got to that I got to really understand and come into in the second half of my life, was this idea that there is no such thing as an orphan in our culture, because you can't be an isolated human being, you know. So if you're finding yourself outcast, or cut off, from community in some way, or you're lost or anything else, there's people will take you in. There's no such thing as an orphan, because a child who's lost their family or is separated from family, that they will get new family straight away, and they'll be brought straight into that family. There's no such thing as an unwanted child. There are unwanted children in this civilization. So civilizations produce unwanted children, but that's not where it begins. The true story of that is unwanted mothers, usually. So in a society that's hostile to mothers, this makes it very difficult, for one mother to be able to raise a child. And I think most people who are unwanted and outcast, which is a lot of mothers, it makes it almost impossible to raise a child. So you end up with a lot of abandoned children. And then the state is supposed to take care of that. And we see what happens, like, with the, the immigration stuff, where children were separated, recently in the United States. They go into the system, and it's been almost impossible to reunite a lot of those children with their families, because they're just lost in the system now. It's absolutely terrifying. But we don't have that. There's no such thing as an unwanted child or an unwanted mother, in Indigenous societies.
And is the basis...
you don't have the orphan. I guess here's the thing, and to answer your question more directly, the idea of the reason the orphan is so attractive in the Western mythology is that it's the perfect candidate for the hero's journey. And it's a very attractive narrative. And I didn't realize that I was, looking at my own sort of, in the first half of my life, my own status as this kind of lost person, this adrift person, how attractive that was to me, and how much I used that in curating my life story, as this dispossessed, adrift, lost person out in the world, having adventures and fighting and being damaged and overcoming that and becoming stronger through every bit of abuse was just making me stronger, and blah, blah, blah. It's an attractive narrative. I can see why people are into it, but it's a lie. The hero's journey is a lie. There's no such thing as a hero.
Tell me more about that, because I actually wrote that down next to orphan, and I felt like that was like the one true thing, because Joseph Campbell wrote a book about every culture has this one story of humanity. And since reading Sandtalk, I was actually starting to say, like, I've done damage by imposing that narrative. Like, it does. Again, it's the narrative of this civilization coming from a deep lack, a deep orphaning from our land. Can you help me understand? Like, tell me why the hero's journey is such bullshit.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I'd made that connection between the orphan idea and I'd only made the connection as far as going, yeah, well, the orphan is attractive to that myth, but then the idea of sort of the whole culture, this dominant world culture, actually this civilization sort of orphaning itself in a way in order to fit with the hero's journey mythology. That's true. I think of this civilization as an adolescent culture, but yeah, it's kind of orphaned itself. Look, we all exist in profound relation, and we know this, no man is an island, all that kind of thing. Everybody knows it. We exist in profound relation, in a web of relations, and that is who you are. Your relationships are who you are, and they make you individual because no other person has exactly the same web of relations that you have. That's your universe, and it's so valuable and so precious, but it's not something that you own or that, makes you this amazing individual at the same time. You exist in relation to that, and you have obligations to that network of relations, and your inputs to that web of life that you belong to are really important. Of course, that's what drives you to do the work that you're doing with your beans and everything else, to come into relation with those plants, because those relationships are not just with other humans, they're with non-humans, and everything around you. Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. That's why I wanted to talk to you again. Yeah, like we talked about yarns, like you mentioned before, the idea of yarns, and when you come into a yarn the wrong way and it doesn't work out, yeah, you don't beat yourself up about it. And so that's why I contacted you and said, no, I want to have another go at a yarn because we didn't get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but there's parts of the hero's journey that I still find, like, again, it's the baby in bathwater sort of thing. Like the idea that there's always a call to adventure, that there's,
yeah.
But I guess the primary thing is, like, the hero is in some sort of barren land, right? Like the queen is infertile, there's a dragon, it starts with a deficit. And the problem with it is that in order to succeed in life, you have to be a fucking hero.
Yeah.
Like, most people I know are not heroes. And in this civilization, in the Tony Robbins world, there's something wrong with you if you don't step up and become a hero, an entrepreneur, a CEO, a megastar.
Yeah.
Right.
But
It explains
we're
why.
so vulnerable. Yeah. As an individual hero, you're so vulnerable. We're very delicate creatures, and without community and without family, we're very strong together, but individually we're ridiculously weak. So, the idea of this impermeable hero who's out having adventures and just injuring himself and others and somehow dominating, it's a lie. It doesn't work. I think I lived that really intensely for about a decade of my life. Being this lone, bloody, separated individual sort of hero or anti-hero, because that's what we were raised with, all those narratives from the 1970s right through till today, that, there's this anti-hero kind of thing, and I was really being that and living that. But the injuries to my body, which now that I'm nearly 50, those are becoming very apparent to me. When you've got a knee that doesn't work, and you've got ribs out of place, and you've got, like, chips and cracks and fractures and things that'll never quite heal properly. It's like, well, that's where the hero's journey takes you. It takes you to a very shortened life and a lot of pain and disability and all kinds of things. There was no such thing as Theseus, Perseus, Achilles, all these people, and there is, even Achilles, it wasn't just his heel that was vulnerable. He was probably a real man, and that real man was just one big heel, one big Achilles heel. And any part, like, your armor is your relationships. If you have good, solid relations that you're in a state of reciprocity with, human and non-human, all around you, that's your armor. That's what protects you from insult and injury in the world,
So is that the alternate story? Like, if I give up the hero's journey, I still need narrative, right, to understand my life. What's the replacement?
Yeah, well, the replacement are those stories of relatedness. And they're there. They're all there. those stories of relatedness are there. Like they're out there in so many different cultures. And they're
Are
so
there any that
exciting.
I'd be
They're so
familiar with?
exciting. Ah,
Like, I feel like,
heaps of them. Half the stories in the Bible are stories of relatedness, in the Quran. You pick a culture, pick a narrative, and you'll find, the emergence of these, hero's journey stuff, because civilization requires that. But you'll also find other things as well.
uh
And a lot of them are cautionary tales as well about going the wrong way individually. Bloody Cain and Abel, start with that. That's a cautionary tale about coming out of a relation.
hmm.
And I mean, I don't want to let's not politicize the
Oh,
rejection of Cain's vegan offering to God, etc. Sorry, I'm just being cheeky there. But every culture has those stories. There are cautionary tales about being the hero and the hero's journey. And even the hero's journey, it's always ends up tragic. Gilgamesh, pretty much the first one that I'm aware of. That doesn't end well for Gilgamesh.
hmm.
You know what I mean? So I guess that's the originating hero's journey mythology. And it's just not what it is. And look, the Aboriginal myths and legends that Joseph Campbell sort of airbrushed and mutated to fit his story. I mean, those actual initiatory rituals and stories, that they're actually very different. They're not about a hero's journey. They're about sort of killing that idea of an individual hero and bringing that person into relation, with their obligations to the dreaming community, to the landscape. That's what those things are for. He only took the part about the hero bit, but if you follow those stories through to the end, you actually see that the idea is it's a cautionary tale against it going that way. It's not about elevating that hero.
So, because like my understanding is the ordeal is, you're going to get your foreskin cut off at the age of 13 and you can't cry, or you have to survive in the wilderness. Like, it does feel like a very individual, stoic, threshold to become a grown-up in your community. What am I missing?
Yeah. It's not that. It's not about that. It's about teaching people that tension and balance are between autonomy and relatedness, because you can't be subsumed into a hive mind either. We're not supposed to be doing that. We're supposed to be maintaining, a tension and balance between our fabulous, unique individuality and our networked relation. We have a fluid, self-other boundary as human beings, where you are you, but at the same time, you are us. And we have, even our language structures in Aboriginal languages reflect that. And there has to be a sort of a tension and constant balance between those two things. They have to be negotiated all the time. And I guess you see this in ecosystems and complexity theory, when you see that the idea of diversity in a complex system is not just having, all these different sort of categories of groups interacting with each other, like Sikhs, talking to Irish over here or something like that. It's within those groups, the people that you are most similar to, you need to maintain a lot of diversity. You need to maintain a lot of difference between yourself and the people you're most similar to, because you see this happening in nature all the time. And it's the way genetic diversity is preserved. So you see, like, one family of chimps has more genetic diversity than the entire human species. There's more genetic diversity in one family of chimps than there is in the entire human species. The idea is you do need to maintain that difference with yourself, but at the same time, it's this kind of networked individualism. It's very hard to explain, but it doesn't sit in a binary like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost like the the initiation ritual is an invitation into a right way and a wrong way. Like you could easily like pass the test by failing or something.
Yeah. But the idea is to teach you that you're not special. So you put someone in a situation where they're very much inhabiting their special, unique individuality, and then you're knocking them out of that. You're teaching them that to live in that is to die. And so you ritualistically kill somebody or banish somebody, within that highly individualized state. And that's the shock that makes somebody become an adult, is to understand who they are individually is nothing. It's their web of relations that makes them unique, and they have obligations to that. And it's a very hard thing to step into, because you've got to kill that idea that you've come up with through childhood, that you're special and you're the center of the universe. Yeah.
I can't wait for you to finish the Queen's Gambit. So
okay,
I'm not going to spoil it for you, but
I can't imagine it's going to end well. Yeah.
But this will come up in the last episode. This issue of special and not special.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess I wanted to talk to you about food, as well, and just the different ways of categorizing that. So it's interesting. So a lot of things from a Western point of view that are regarded as an animal product or a plant product. So I mean, we have so in my family's language, we have food is broadly divided into mai and min. So min is your protein sort of based, mostly animal products, min, and mai is mostly your cellulose, that kind of thing. So almost plant based, and everything's categorized into that or that. And you kind of you have to have a 50-50 balance between those things. So your any meal will ideally be half and half mai and half min. But if you look at something as simple as honey, so honey is called at, but so you put the prefix, you put either mai or min in front of any animal or plant. Now honey is called mai at. So that's in the vegetable side, But then if you look in other parts of the hive are classified as min, so the pollen, the propolis, all that sort of thing, that's called min.
So it's more about a quality.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's sort of like I'm picturing the yin yang of
exactly.
not binaries, but dualities.
Yeah. So balance. Like, half the hive is seen as like a plant-based food, and half of it is seen as protein. It's really interesting. So we have that, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of, there's a wrongness to just going too far in either direction, with your diet. So if somebody's just eating kangaroo or magpie goose or something like that, then that person won't live for very long. There has to be there has to be a lot of variation in the diet, and it also has to be seasonal. You can only eat things when they're in their peak nutritional phase in a season. So that only lasts for up to for like a couple of months, that you're eating this one particular food, and then you don't eat it until that time again next year, and that's how it works. And so there's a different diet in every season, and there are, up to 8 seasons. There's between 6 and 8 seasons anywhere where you go in Australia, and you see this all around the world. That 4 seasons model was really an economic model that was imposed on, times for extraction, of resources. That's a civilized model of the seasons, is 4 seasons. But there's nowhere in the world that there are just 4 distinct seasons. There are, between 6 and 8, anywhere where you go in the world. You'll see those changes happening.
Yeah. What's coming to me as you say that is coming back to the idea of hero, because, you know, my job is I coach people to be healthy. And in this society, it means doing hard things all the time.
Yeah.
Right. It means getting up in the morning and going for a run. Like, why the fuck would I do that? It's cold outside. It means saying no to the concentrated calories at the checkout counter of everywhere. And like, again, like this idea that like we shouldn't have to be heroes. It's like what you're talking about is a civilization willingly living within constraint, where like if I can't eat a Snickers bar or eat, you know, chicken 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, this idea of the herds, like there's a farmer in America, Joel Salatin, who has does the rotational grazing, and there's a guy Alan Savory in Zimbabwe, I think, who's trying to do like holistic management. The truth is, if every farmer did that, people would be eating like a pound of meat a week or a month, and not 4 pounds a day. It's like we're so opposed to constraint. Like, don't like give me choice, and yet it's the constraint that is one of the ways that makes us undomesticated or human, as you put it.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, the times in my life when I've been healthy, and this isn't one. You know, I've been eating small amounts of animal products, high quality. You know, like wild meat. Even when I was eating, I spent quite a period of my life living off roadkill. You know, when I was very destitute, and I was healthier then than I am now. You know, if you're having high quality animal products, you don't need very much. You can do very well on like 1 meal a day, and you can even skip a day. You know, but you know, at the same time, your body is not your own. You know, most of your body is inhabited by other tiny beings that need to be eating, that they live off those vegetable products. They need it.
Right.
And you can't just be having all these cadaverines and nothing else going in, because you've got to feed those little beings, because they're the ones that make up most of your body weight, you know, and they need that. And those little beings, most of them are vegetarian. So they need to be eating that. So, you know, anyone who's doing this carnivore diet wrong way, you know, you need all of these things. But I mean, back to the hero's journey, like you mentioned exercise. I mean, so I spent quite a bit of my life where the exercise was natural, you know. So, you know, I was hunting or fishing or out walking or running on country to get somewhere, or, you know, looking for wood, you know, over a vast area, looking for exactly the right kind of wood in the right shape to carve. And then the act of carving itself, this was my exercise. That was good. Before that, I had to do, in order to keep myself fit, to be the hero that could fight people randomly in the street. You know, I had to train a lot. And to force yourself to do purposeless exercise, the only purpose is, you know, to be fit. It's this abstract, it's really hard. And you need a narrative to do that. And you need the hero's journey to force yourself to do that. You know, so I wonder what story you tell yourself when you're exercising pointlessly. So for me, I used to play the soundtrack of Conan the Barbarian in my head. And I couldn't force myself to run 10Ks unless I was sort of the whole time going, bum, 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 and I had to do that the whole way, just to be like, rah, you know, I'm this
my
sole lone hero in a hard landscape, and what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and off we go. And you have to tell yourself that story, or you can't force yourself into that. It's very hard. What story do you tell yourself that's more healthy?
My narrative is human beings were not supposed to sit, or like, you know, they're supposed to move. Like, we are bipedal. And so if I don't do 5, 6, 10 miles a day, I'm not being human.
Yeah.
And if I want to pretend I'm a hunter, I have to average about 10 miles, you know, 10-minute miles.
Yeah.
get to, walk, sprint a little bit. Like what would I like?
Do what
like,
you normally do while foraging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and I learned this from one of my business partners, a guy from Louisiana who used to be 400 pounds and became a very fit human. It's like, and he grew up hunting and fishing. It was like, like watching animals, like,
Yeah.
what do I owe the world for the calories I'm taking in? Because I get the calories I'm taking in by sitting in front of this screen and writing and talking.
Yeah.
But I haven't earned them with my body.
Yeah.
Like, how do I earn my calories?
Yeah. It's very difficult. I guess, I mean, that's where resistance training most sort of mimics what you're supposed to be doing, because you're not just running 10Ks as a human. You're going, having bursts of speed, you're going fast, slow, you're negotiating that with other people who are also doing diverse activities with you. You're stopping and picking things up, you're carrying things, maybe something heavy, you're collecting things, you're bending down, standing up, you're digging, you're all kinds of things,
But by
so I
far
think
the
there
best...
has to be variety, but it's still purposeless, Man, I tried that CrossFit. I tried really hard.
Yeah.
Because when I moved to the city, I wasn't getting the natural movement that I had before, and I enjoyed like 15 or 20 years of it, of actually moving through landscapes in the right way. And then I moved to the city about 3 years ago, and I'm so unhealthy and I'm so overweight now. And it's very difficult because I can't inspire myself. Now, I just can't do the Conan theme anymore. It doesn't inspire me like I did when I was a kid, but now I'm like, what do I do? I mean, I can't, I'm finding it really hard to force myself to do exercise that doesn't do anything. It just burns calories for no purpose. It's like, what am I producing? What am I looking after? I'm not looking after any landscapes. I'm like, I mean, how could I do that in a landscape that's, essentially a swamp that's been covered over with concrete?
Yeah. The other way I think about it is that my running is some sort of an offering, a sacrifice, a prayer.
Nice.
Like this is like, this body was created to be optimal in a certain way, and like giving it up to the universe, to creator. To say like, okay, I'm in a shitty place and I have to run on an asphalt road and I have to pick up fake things and lift them. Like when I can, we have some woods, I can chop down a dead tree and chop it for firewood and haul it. Like that feels incredible. Yeah. But the rest of the time it's like, okay, so it's really hard right now. It's not it's like being vegan. It's like it's not the natural state, but what's the best I can do? Yeah.
So you're ritualizing it and you're offering that up.
Yeah, it's definitely
that's great.
Bigger than
that's
me.
Deadly. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's a really good. I'm going to try that one. I mean, see, I've located all the places where underground water is flowing under the concrete here, because you can feel it through your feet. It's like this magnetism, and it's the first thing I did when I got here was I followed where the flows of water were so I could understand where I was, maybe I should be running those lines of energy. Maybe I should be running and walking those and connecting that way. And that's the way I get my exercise. So I'm going to try that and I'll send you an email to let you know how it worked out.
Oh, awesome. And I'm thinking I would love to, I don't want to impose on you, but I would love to have one more of these conversations with you and with Josh, the Louisiana guy who I got to listen. He listened to Sand Talk, and I told him that he was the most indigenous person I know. Or undomesticated. I said like he's wild in some very interesting ways. I would love to, participate in that conversation.
Yeah. It's and that I know what you mean by wild, but I mean that word's got a lot of, hero's journey connotations too. Like the difference between Gilgamesh and Enkidu kind of thing. There's this idea of wildness being unstructured and all that sort of thing. But I mean, what's interesting is how much restraint you have when you're living in the constraints of the law of the land.
Hmm.
You know, the limits that the land places upon you, and the obligations once you come into relation with that land, the obligations that are on you, the immense obligations that you have to land and place. I mean, it's funny that wildness is not random and chaotic. It's so highly structured, and it's so restrictive. It's wildness is restrictive, and I think
Hmm.
most people would not want to be harnessed by wildness. Although even the idea of wild is this kind of idea of chaotic randomness. That's not what it is. It's law with a capital L. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's,
but
I mean, but
I
it
know
feels,
that's what you mean when you say wild, but
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like a lot of other people's definitions of wild is very different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when I feel that obligation,
Mm.
I never feel more human than when I feel like I'm under that obligation. Like
Yeah,
things
that's it.
become clear.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the end of my orphanhood. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm part of something. And it happens,
Yeah. And you're
rarely, but it's all,
ritualistically running and connecting with that. You know, you're doing that as ceremony. Your exercise is almost ceremony that's
yes.
bringing you into relation. Um, you know, with something that your domestication is sort of forcing you to be separate from, but you're coming back into relation with that. It's lovely.
Yeah, it does feel like a rebellion against domestication to
Mm,
run until it hurts,
yeah,
right? Because my ancestors didn't have a choice when they needed to forage, when they needed to, and I know you talk about like the paleo time was not a time of scarcity, but it was
yeah,
certainly a time of effort.
yeah, yeah. There's effort, but then I mean, there almost wasn't enough to do in that, and that's why kind of sport and contests sort of came about. You know what I mean? I mean, the
Mhm.
amount of effort that people put into, like, most of your exercise as a Paleolithic person would have been in ceremony and dance and sport. You know, like very very vigorous sport. You know, it's I mean, in see, the idea of moving around a landscape seasonally, you're going to different areas in different seasons where things are abundant. That's the idea, and that's what defines a bioregion. Is the area in which humans in their ecological niche are able to move around and find abundance within a given territory. That's what a bioregion is. And that was what most of the boundaries of territories were. And they're quite stable for a long time, hundreds of thousands of years. You know, so you're there and you're in that place on your territory, in your bioregion, where it's just optimal abundance in that particular season. Like, you know, you can almost close your eyes in a bird or bat season and just throw a stick in the air and knock something for your lunch, you know, and that's it.
Right.
It's
And that's the experience I get at the supermarket.
yeah. And I mean, a lot of your effort is going into actually looking after that country as well.
Mm.
So, you know, not just, you know, digging laboriously to find one root vegetable to eat, but you're digging in a way that is going to reproduce that root vegetable. So you're leaving part there, but you might be planting others around the place in that area. You know, so you're not just trying to extract from the land. You're always trying to give back, you know, as much as you're taking, and you're trying to, propagate and regenerate all of these things and to increase those things. And there's a lot of effort that goes into that, into the management of land, but then into the ritual sort of ceremonies and very vigorous dances that go for, like, you know, like big ceremonies that go for like 8 hours, where you're just flat out. You haven't got time to get a drink of water. You're dancing and dancing and dancing, and that is so much more vigorous
Mm.
than what it takes to extract, you know, the energy that you need from the landscape.
Mm.
You have to be putting that back in, you know. So I guess there is that idea of purposeless activity that isn't about finding nutrition, that's actually, yeah, ritualized in the way that you say. I think that's really important, what you've
Mm.
expressed there, that
Mm.
exercise almost needs to be ceremony.
Oh, I love that.
I love that.
It's
I
a form
love
of
that.
It's a form of manners.
Yeah.
Like it's like human beings who are extractive exclusively, or it's rude,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Well, look, now that, I mean, this conversation's probably added 10 years to my life. So I thank you for that, because I'm going to start to try and reimagine exercise as ceremony, because I'm missing both. Like in the city, I'm missing ceremony. I'm missing exercise, that I would normally do in my relation with caring for country and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, that is
And we would
that's
also do it.
spectacular.
We would also do it in community normally,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
running with a group or playing a game or doing chores together
yeah,
feels much more natural. Like every so often I'll go out and do
yeah,
something in solitude, but not preferably.
yeah. Well, there's the lone jogger who's like trying to improve their personal best time or whatever, or get their heart rate to a certain level. But then you got groups of joggers who are kind of trying to find, the aggregate kind of pace and direction and route together, which that's really something too. Yeah.
Yeah, for a long time I was working on, with my GPS watch. Like, can I get under a 9:30 pace? Can I go faster? And then there's a guy who runs on my street in the morning when I run, older guy, runs with a dog. I love him. And I decided, like, you know what? We're going to do 12-minute miles just so I can hang out with Gary. As opposed, like that felt more important for myself and for the world than like a race pace.
Yeah, that's it. Competition is not necessarily the best way to go. And I guess, if we see ourselves as individuals in competition for resources, or in competition for, what's the narrative about those resources and everything else, I think that's the unhealthy way to go. I think we're on a path to rediscovering a way in this time of transition, into rediscovering ways of moving back into a more kind of human relation with the world around us, through these things, through diet, through exercise, all of these things. Yeah.
Beautiful. That seems like a good place to wrap up for now.
Beautiful.
So Tyson,
thank you so much for yarning, Howie. Yeah.
Oh, so happy. I can't wait till COVID goes away and I can go to Australia and
sounds great.
Learn how to carve and run and
yeah, well, you can come and see what the concrete looks like over here.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Okay. It was great to talk to you, Howie. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
All right. I hope you really enjoyed that conversation. It was a mind blower for me. You can also watch this on YouTube or at plantyourself.com/439, where you can also find the show notes for today's episode. So what do we got? We got running news. Running news is I had a really good Frisbee game until my last play, which was the throw was a little bit high. I reached up and hyperextended my knee and messed it up again. So I'm back to walking probably for another week or two. Bad Howie. Garden news, the exciting thing was I built a couple of ramps for sheds where we keep our two-wheel tractor and our lawnmower. I've never been much of a handyman, so it's really exciting for me to like build these ramps and screw things together and pour down gravel. I feel very gratified, like I'm living according to the law of the land in some small way. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenhour for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenhour.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gila Cert, David Donahue, Blair Cyborg, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Power for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.